Picture a house you know, a respectable house. Stone front, clean windows, a brass knocker on the door that someone polishes every Tuesday morning without fail. A house where people eat at regular hours and say prayers before bed and keep their voices low when guests are present. Now picture what's behind the door at the end of the upstairs corridor, the one that's always locked, the one nobody mentions, the one that has, if you look carefully, and you shouldn't look carefully, that's the first unspoken rule of the house. A bolt on the outside, a heavy one, iron, set deep into the wood, and behind that bolt a room, maybe 8 feet by 10, maybe smaller, and in that room, someone you know. That's what we're talking about tonight. Not asylums, not Bethlehem Hospital with its stone corridors and its pay-in visitors who come to gawk on Sunday afternoons like it's a zoo. Not the workhouse, not the jail, a family home, a respectable house, a locked room, and someone inside it who hasn't seen the outside of those 4 walls in months or years, or, and this is the part that will sit with you, decades. Before the asylum system existed, before the county lunatic asylums, before any of the legal machinery that eventually imperfectly began to regulate what happened to people deemed mad, or difficult, or simply inconvenient. Before all of that, this is where they went. Into the house, into the room, behind the bolt. And the house kept going. Dinners were served. Children were born and baptized and sent to school. Business was conducted. Visitors came and drank wine in the parlour and didn't ask about the noises from upstairs, because you simply did not ask. So, I make these sleep histories, and I'll be honest with you, this one is a different kind of dark. Not the dramatic dark of a battlefield or a plague. Something quieter, more domestic. The dark of a room that smells of straw and old chamber pots, and someone who has been forgotten by everyone except the person who shoves food under the door twice a day and tries not to make eye contact. Get comfortable. You've earned your rest. We're going in. Here we go. The advertisement is 12 words long. You read it 3 times in the coffee house off Corn Street in Bristol, standing because there are no empty seats, and your boots are damp from the November rain outside, and the paper is slightly soft from the moisture in the air, going limp at the edges where you're holding it. Wanted. A sober, discreet young man for permanent household position. References required. Apply Harrow Hall, Wiltshire. 12 words. Sober, discreet. Those 2 words is doing a lot of work, but you don't know that yet. You're 19 years old. Your father's drapery shop on King Street folded 6 months ago. Not dramatically, not in one catastrophic crash, but slowly. The way cloth rots. One debt, then another. The lease ended and wasn't renewed. The stock was sold to pay what could be paid, and what couldn't be paid is why you're in Bristol instead of home, why your name is attached to a modest scandal you had no part in creating, but can't shake loose. You need work. You need work that doesn't ask too many questions about the past 6 months. Sober, discreet. Yes, you can be those things. The journey to Harrow Hall takes the better part of 2 days. A mail coach to Bath, lurching over roads that the November rains have turned into something closer to rivers than tracks, packed in against a wool merchant who falls asleep immediately and snores with the consistency of a mill wheel, and a woman of indeterminate age who watches you with the focused suspicion of someone who has been robbed before and intends not to be robbed again. You arrive in Bath with mud up to your knees from climbing down into a flooded rut outside Keynsham. The second leg is a hired cart, driven by a man of about 60 with the reddened face and permanently squinting eyes of someone who has spent decades looking into weather. He doesn't speak for the first hour. Then, somewhere past the village of Bradenstoke, he says, without preamble, "Harrow Hall." "That's right," you say. He's quiet for another quarter-mile. "Good luck to you," he says. He doesn't elaborate, you don't ask. The cart keeps moving. The house is larger than you expected and more run-down than the word hall suggests. You see it first from the top of a slight rise, in the grey mid-afternoon light of a November day that never quite got properly. Bright. Stone facade. 5 windows across the upper floor, 3 across the lower flanking a central door. The kind of house that was, at some point, someone's pride. Someone maintained those gardens once. Someone planted those yew hedges that are now shapeless, overgrown, spilling over the gravel path like water over a broken dam. The cart stops at the gate. The driver doesn't offer to take you further. You climb down with your bag, one bag, canvas, not heavy, and walk the quarter-mile of drive to the front door alone. The gravel crunches under your boots. Your breath fogs in the cold air. A crow calls once from somewhere in the elms to the left, and doesn't call again. You knock. The woman who answers is perhaps 50, built like a door herself, solid, rectangular, slightly immovable. Her hair is iron grey, pulled back with the sort of ferocity that suggests she has no patience for anything that won't stay where it's been put. "Thomas Hale?" she says. "Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Pell, I run this house." She looks you over the way a farmer examines livestock at a market. Not unkindly, but with complete absence of sentiment. Your references were satisfactory. "Come in, mind the mat. Don't put your bag there. Put it there." She's already walking by the time she finishes the sentence. You follow her into the entrance hall. The hall is cold. That's the first thing. The kind of cold that lives in stone houses in winter, that settles into the walls and doesn't leave until April. There's no fire in the entrance hearth, and the flagstones under your feet are hard enough that you feel each one through the soles of your boots. The second thing is the smell. Every house has a smell. This one has beeswax from the floors, which are well polished despite everything else. Cold smoke from somewhere further in, damp wool. And underneath all of that, very faint, something you can't immediately name, something sharp and medicinal, something that catches at the back of your throat. You'll learn what that smell is. Not yet. "This way," says Mrs. Pell. You're taken to the kitchen, which is at least warm. A fire burns in the great hearth, and a woman of perhaps 35 is stirring something in a pot with the methodical patience of a person who's been stirring things her entire life. She doesn't look up when you enter. "Cook," says Mrs. Pell by way of introduction. Cook continues stirring. "Sit down," Mrs. Pell says to you. She takes a seat across the kitchen table and folds her hands. "I'll explain your position. You'll listen and not interrupt. When I'm finished, you may ask questions if you have them. If your questions are sensible ones, I'll answer them. If they aren't, I'll tell you they aren't, and you'll not ask them again. Clear?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She looks at you steadily. "Your position is attendant to Miss Whitmore, Miss Anne Whitmore. She is the daughter of the late Sir Edward Whitmore of this house. She's 34 years of age. She has resided in the upper room of the East Wing for the past 11 years. Your duties will be as follows." She lists them without inflection, the way you'd list items in a ledger. Rising at 6 to prepare the morning tray. Bringing the tray to the room. Collecting the previous night's chamber pot. Bringing fresh water. Remaining available throughout the day in case of... She pauses here, just briefly. in case of disturbance. Collecting the midday tray, the evening tray, securing the room at nightfall, keeping a record of anything significant. Disturbance, you repeat. What kind of disturbance? Mrs. Pell looks at you with an expression that isn't quite surprise, but acknowledges that this was at least a sensible question. Miss Whitmore has difficulty, she says, sometimes more difficulty than other times. When she has difficulty, you'll stay calm. You won't shout. You won't... She stops, seems to be choosing words. You won't escalate. You'll speak quietly and you'll wait. Usually it passes. What kind of difficulty, you ask? A pause. The kind that put her in that room, Mrs. Pell says, and stands up, and that apparently is the end of that question. Your room is in the servants' wing. Small, which you expected. Cold, which you expected. A bed with a rope mattress topped by a straw-filled ticking. A blanket that's been washed so many times it's thin as paper. A small window looking out onto the stable yard, and a candle on a wooden holder. There's also, which you didn't expect, a key hanging on a hook beside the door. Not to your room. Your room doesn't lock. The key is large. Iron. Old enough to have developed a faint reddish tinge at the teeth. That's for the east corridor door, Mrs. Pell says from the doorway. She doesn't come in. She stands at the threshold, which you'll understand later is a habit of hers. A slight withdrawal from every room she enters. Keep it with you. Don't lose it. There's only one other. I have it. Yes, Mum. She nods, already half turned to leave. Mrs. Pell, you say? She stops. The previous attendant, you say carefully. What happened to them? She turns back, looks at you. He left, she says, after 4 months. Why? He found it, she says, difficult. And then she's gone, her footsteps precise and unhurried on the stone floor of the corridor outside. You sit on the edge of your bed and hold the key and listen to the house settle around you in the cold. Somewhere above you a door creaks. You don't look up, but you notice it. The church bell from the village, a mile distant but sound carries strangely in this flat country, drags you out of sleep at 5:30. You didn't sleep well. The straw mattress pokes through the ticking at approximately 7 distinct points. The cold woke you twice in the night, once so profoundly that you could see your own breath in the darkness without even a candle lit. But you get up, sober and discreet. That's what you're here to be. The kitchen is already lit when you get there. Cook has been up since 4 apparently, which is simply the rhythm of a working household, and if you expected any acknowledgement of your presence from her, you're again disappointed. She does gesture, without looking up, toward the prepared tray on the side table. Porridge in a covered bowl. A cup of something that turns out to be weak small beer. A piece of bread, no butter. A small cup of water. You pick up the tray. Stairs are at the end of the corridor, Cook says, still not looking up. The east wing. Mind the 3rd step. It's soft. Thank you. Don't spill the bowl. You don't spill the bowl, though the 3rd step does in fact drop slightly under your foot with a creak that sounds, in the silence of the cold house, approximately like a gunshot. The east corridor is darker than the rest of the house. The single window at the far end faces north, and in November at 6 in the morning it lets in approximately no light at all. So you carry a candle in one hand and the tray in the other, and try not to think about what happens if you drop the candle and set the house on fire on your first morning. You count the doors. 1, 2, 3. The 4th one is yours. This is the one with the bolt. You balance the tray on your forearm. Awkward, terrifying. The bowl shifts, and draw the bolt with your free hand. It slides without noise. recently oiled. Someone has been maintaining this bolt with some care. You put down the tray, take out the key, unlock the door, push it open. Pause. The smell hits you before anything else. Not bad, exactly. Not the thing you feared, not filth or rot, but close and human and dense. The air of a room that has been breathed in and breathed out by one person for a very long time, without enough fresh air coming in to dilute it. Straw, wool, skin, the faint ghost of the chamber pot, cleaned but never entirely erased. And something else. Lavender, of all things. A small sachet of it on the windowsill that has long since given up most of its potency, but still makes the ghost of an effort. The room is grey. The window is small and high and barred. Iron bars, not thick but enough. Dawn is just beginning to show beyond them, a pale smear of lighter darkness over the flat Wiltshire fields. There's a bed. A real bed, not a pallet. You note this. Iron-framed, a proper mattress, a wooden chair, a small table with books on it, 3 books, a chamber pot in the corner, lid on, a washstand, a blanket chest, and on the bed, sitting up against the headboard with her knees drawn to her chest and her arms around them, watching you, is Miss Anne Whitmore. She's not what you expected. You didn't know what you expected. Something formless, maybe. Something loud or dishevelled or frightening. That's the thing people picture when they say someone is locked away, isn't it? She's none of those things. She's a slight woman, dark-haired, going to grey at the temples, wearing a grey woolen dress that is clean and neat and doesn't entirely hide the fact that she is thinner than she should be. Her eyes are very dark, very still. She's watching you with the focused, evaluating attention of someone who has had a great deal of practice at watching people come through that door and has learned to read them quickly. "You're new," she says. Her voice is steady, almost conversational, like she's noting the weather. "Yes," you say. "Thomas Hale. I'm the new attendant, Miss Whitmore." A pause. She looks at the tray. "Porridge again," she says. "I'm afraid so." "It's always porridge. For 11 years, Thomas Hale. It has been porridge every morning except Sunday when it is gruel. I don't know which is worse." You set the tray on the small table. You're not sure if this is the moment for sympathy or neutrality. You try for something in between, which is to say, you say nothing at all and concentrate on placing the tray down without spilling anything. "The last one didn't last long," she says. "So I heard." "He cried on the 3rd day. Did they tell you that?" "They didn't." "He sat outside in the corridor and wept. I could hear him through the door. I felt quite terrible about it." She watches you move toward the chamber pot. "I'm not sure I was the cause, really. I think it was more the whole—" She gestures, a small, encompassing wave of her hand. "Situation." You pick up the chamber pot. It is exactly as unpleasant as you'd expect it to be. You manage not to react visibly. "I won't cry in the corridor," you say. "No," she says, studying you. "I don't think you will." The morning establishes its routine quickly, because routine is what this position runs on. Mrs. Pell is a woman of great faith in routine, and you come to understand that the routine here is not merely organisation. It is a kind of wall. A structure built to contain not just Miss Whitmore, but the entire strangeness of the situation. If everything happens at the same time, in the same order, with the same small actions repeated with the same precision, then the thing at the centre of the house doesn't have to be looked at directly. 6 o'clock. Morning tray. Change the chamber pot. Fresh water in the basin. Open the window for 20 minutes. Yes, even in November. Yes, all the way open. This is Dr. Griggs's instruction, and it is to be followed exactly. Dr. Griggs. You meet him on the third morning. He arrives at the house on horseback, which, given the state of the lanes in November, tells you something about his constitution or his dedication or both, and he's younger than you expected, perhaps 40, with the kind of lean, weathered face that belongs to a man who spends too much time outdoors for his profession. He wears good boots, not fashionable, and he carries a bag that clinks faintly when he walks. "The new man," he says, looking you over in the entrance hall. "How are you finding it?" "Manageable," you say, which is mostly true. "Good. Come up with me. I'll show you what to watch for." Dr. Samuel Griggs is not, he tells you without particular embarrassment, a physician in the formal sense. He read medicine for 2 years at Edinburgh before his money ran out, and he came back south to practice as best he could in the country, which is to say, he does what he can with what he knows, and what he knows is more than most. He tells you this as you stand in the east corridor outside Miss Whitmore's door while he prepares his bag, not apologically, matter-of-factly. "There's no formal qualification required to tend to a lunatic," he says, sorting through small glass bottles with the practiced economy of someone who has done this many times, which is both convenient and rather alarming depending on how you look at it. "Lunatic," you repeat. He glances up. "Is that the word that troubles you?" "I'm not sure she is one," you say, carefully. He stops sorting bottles, looks at you with the kind of attention that suggests you've said something he's either been waiting to hear or been hoping not to. "No," he says after a moment. "I'm not entirely sure either, but I am the doctor, and I've been paid to maintain this arrangement, and the family has what they consider good reasons for it. So..." He picks up a bottle, brown glass, unlabelled. "That's the situation." "What's that?" you ask, nodding at the bottle. "Laudanum for the difficult periods." He replaces it in the bag. "I don't use it unless I need to. I need to, approximately," he thinks, 4 or 5 times a year, when the episodes are severe. Otherwise I prefer to let her be." "What are the episodes?" He pauses at the door, his hand on the wood. "Sometimes she screams," he says. "Long periods of screaming. Sometimes she doesn't speak at all for days. Sometimes she becomes convinced of things that are not true, and those are the hardest. Not because they're frightening, but because they're sad. And there's nothing to be done about sad." He looks at the door. "And sometimes..." He stops, seems to be deciding how much to tell you. "Sometimes she has very long periods of complete clarity, weeks at a time. She reads, she talks, she is..." He chooses the word carefully. "She is entirely herself, and those are the hardest periods for the family when they visit." "Why?" "Because it's very difficult to justify this." He gestures at the locked door, the bolt, the corridor. "When the person inside it is perfectly capable of discussing Pope's essay on man with you, and asking pointed questions about why exactly she cannot go outside." He knocks at the door before opening it. You note this: he always knocks. Miss Whitmore is in one of her clear periods, it turns out. This is the word Dr. Griggs uses, clear, and it sits uneasily with you from the beginning, because a clear period, as far as you can tell, means she is entirely rational, entirely aware of her situation, and entirely furious about it in the careful, contained way of someone who has learned that fury gets you nowhere when you're behind a locked door. She doesn't shout at Dr. Griggs. She doesn't throw things or weep. She asks him while he checks her pulse and looks at her eyes and asks his standard questions in his standard voice about his last visit to Bath, whether the assembly rooms are still as crowded as they were, whether he has been reading anything of interest, whether the roads are passable yet. She asks him these questions the way a person asks about the weather, not because she particularly cares about the weather, but because talking about the weather is what you do when the real thing between you can't be talked about. Dr. Griggs answers, steady, kind, careful. And while he answers, she looks at you over his shoulder. Not accusingly, not helplessly, just looking, like she's filing you away somewhere. The position comes with a room, 2 meals a day, and 12 shillings a month. You learn these facts from Mrs. Pell in the same tone she would have used to read a lease agreement. The room you've already seen. The meals happen at the kitchen table and consist largely of whatever cook has been making, which is solid and adequate and seasoned with a confidence in salt that takes some getting used to. You eat your first full dinner at the kitchen table across from James, who is the footman. James is 17, from a village 3 miles away, and is cheerful with the untroubled ease of someone who has not yet been hit hard by anything. He's been at the house for 8 months and has a carefully maintained curiosity about the upper floor of the east wing that tells you he's been instructed not to ask and has taken the instruction seriously. They let me have Sundays off, he says, eating rapidly in the way of someone accustomed to meals being interrupted. Half-day Saturday. You? I'm not sure, you say. You actually don't know Mrs. Pell didn't mention it. You should ask. The last fellow, Williams, he never asked and they just never told him. He worked 7 days for 3 months before he figured it out. You make a note to ask. What do you think of her? James asks, not meeting your eyes, examining his bread. Miss Whitmore. Yes. You consider this. I think she seems well. James nods slow, spreads butter that's clearly been stretched too thin. She is. Mostly. It's just... He stops, glances toward the ceiling. You hear things. At night sometimes. What kind of things? He shakes his head, not refusing to answer, something else. Like he's genuinely unsure how to put it. Singing, he says finally. Sometimes just singing. He goes back to his bread. You go back to yours. Above you, the house is quiet. You don't get the whole story at once. Nobody in this house tells you anything whole. Information comes in pieces the way tiles fall off a roof. One here, one there, and you put together the picture slowly, and the picture that forms is not quite the one you thought you were assembling. Mrs. Pell tells you eventually that Miss Whitmore was brought to the East Room in the autumn of 1732. She was 23 years old. The reason given at the time was an agitation of the nerves following a period of extreme religious enthusiasm. She had become, in the family's view, excessively devout, not merely pious, excessive. She was praying for hours at a time, refusing meals, speaking of visions. What kind of visions, you ask? Mrs. Pell is counting linens in the storeroom. She doesn't stop counting. The kind that families do not wish to discuss, she says. You understand. You understand that you're not going to get a direct answer. Dr. Griggs tells you more, across several of his weekly visits, in the indirect way he has of communicating things he's not quite comfortable with. She was the second daughter. The eldest, Charlotte, married well. A man with land in Dorset. The youngest, Henry, has the house now since Sir Edward died 5 years ago. Anne was engaged once, briefly, to a man whose name Dr. Griggs either doesn't know or doesn't offer. The engagement ended. Nobody's quite clear why. And then the behaviour started, or worsened, depending on who you ask. Was she ill, you ask, as direct as you can manage. I believe, he says, that she was grieving, and that her family mistook grief for madness, which is, he pauses, sets down his bag, an easy mistake to make if you're not paying careful attention, and if you find it convenient. This is the most direct thing he says to you in the first month. You hold on to it. The history of the room itself you get from the room, because the room has a history. It isn't blank. 11 years of a person living in it leaves marks, and you begin to read them the way you'd read a palimpsest. The newer marks over the older ones, and underneath everything, if you look carefully, the original. The books are the first thing, not 3 books. You miscounted that first morning. 17, stacked in order by some system that isn't immediately obvious. Addison, Swift, Richardson's Pamela, which she read 4 times based on the wear to the spine. A Bible, heavily annotated in tiny precise handwriting. A book of sermons. A geography of the known world. 1729 edition. Its pages worn thin at the maps. Milton. 2 volumes of poetry you don't recognise. She reads every day. That's what the morning gives way to, after the tray and the water and the windows 20 minutes open to the freezing Wiltshire air. She sits in the chair by the window with a book, and she reads. And you have understood since the second morning that the books are what keep her here, in herself, tethered. Have you read this one? She asks you the first week, holding up the Milton. No, you say. It's about a man who falls from grace, she says. I find it, she considers, more interesting than I think I'm supposed to. Why? Because Satan is the most alive thing in it. More alive than God. More alive than Adam. He has ambition. He has fury. He is completely wrong about almost everything, and yet you understand him. She leans back in the chair. The family gave me the Bible. I asked for Milton. They sent Milton, I think, without reading it first. The marks on the wall beside the bed you find in the second week. Not scratches, small marks, regular, made with what might be charcoal. You count them. Stop counting at 140. Continue. 170. 200. You don't count the rest, but you understand what they are. 11 years of mornings. The worn place on the floor in front of the window, that small oval where the stone flags are smoother than anywhere else. You figure out eventually. That's where she stands, every day, looking out. The window is too high to see out easily when sitting, so she stands. And the stone remembers it. These scratch marks on the outside of the door frame. These you notice while closing the door one morning. A series of small parallel lines at about shoulder height. Made from the outside, you first think. Then you look more carefully. From the inside, the door opens outward. She would have stood at the threshold, on the days when someone left it open accidentally, on the days when she tested it and pressed her fingers against the frame. Just that far, just to that edge, and no further. You learn things in pieces, and you learn them not just about this house. It starts with a conversation. You've been here 3 weeks. It's a Sunday, which you've established does come with an afternoon off, and you've walked the mile to the village to buy a paper and sit in the single small tavern that serves as the village's entire social life. The man next to you at the bar is a farmer with muddy boots and the rolling gait of someone who has spent a lifetime on uneven ground. He notices the direction you've come from. Working at the hall, he says. Yes. He makes a sound that is not quite a word, something between acknowledgement and condolence. Local knowledge, you ask. Old knowledge, he says. That house has had someone locked in it since before I was born. My father told me they had a son early on. Before this family, different century, same room. Same room? The East Wing room. The bars on the window have been there 60 years at least. He drinks. Not uncommon, he says. Every third family in the county has one, or had one. My mother's people had a cousin shut in a cellar for 20 years. Harmless, by all accounts. Just not right. Couldn't manage the world, and the world couldn't manage him. Easiest to put him somewhere and not discuss it. 20 years, you say? He outlived the arrangement, the farmer says. Died in the cellar, in his sleep. They found him in the morning when they brought the tray. 63 years old. He sets down his cup. There are worse ways to go, I suppose. I'm not sure it was the worst life he could have had, but I'm not sure it was a life either. He stands to leave, wipes his mouth. The woman at the hall, he says, she singing still? Sometimes, you say. He nods, like this is a reassurance, and walks out into the Sunday afternoon. You get the paper home and sit by the fire in the servants' kitchen, the one proper warm room you're allowed access to and only barely, and read it with the dogged attention of someone trying to stay connected to a world that feels increasingly remote. Parliament, a bill about something, the price of bread, a notice of a sale in Bath, and on the second page, sandwiched between an advertisement for a cure for the falling sickness and a notice about a runaway apprentice, a short piece, perhaps 200 words. Concerning the management of persons afflicted in their minds, it is headed. A letter to the paper from a physician in London, a Dr. T, who argues that the practice of confining lunatics in private homes is productive of much suffering and little benefit, and that proper establishments, properly regulated, would serve better the interests of both the afflicted and their families. You read it twice. The word that stops you is families, not patients, not sufferers. Families. The interest that matters apparently is the families. The practice is old. That's the thing you come to understand across the weeks at Harrow Hall, as you piece together what you can from conversations and papers and the occasional book that Dr. Griggs leaves behind by accident or design. As old as families, as old as the idea of a family name, a family reputation, a thing to be protected and maintained. When someone in the family became, in the language of the time, distracted or melancholy or frenzied, or merely difficult, the first instinct, not in 1743, not specifically, but in every century before it and in this one too, was containment, not cure, containment. The rich had more options and used them to better effect, which is to say, with more comfort and less visibility. A room in the wing of a house, an attendant paid for silence as much as for care, a doctor of convenient opinions who could be trusted to write whatever was necessary and whatever documents were necessary, and ask no further questions. The middle sort managed as they could, which often meant a locking room if the house had one, or a cellar or an outbuilding, a barn, a granary, places with sturdy walls and not too many windows. The poor managed the same way they managed everything, badly, without resources, alone. Their difficult relatives were kept as long as keeping was possible, and when it became impossible they became the parish's problem, which generally meant the workhouse, which generally meant the poorest ward, which generally meant... But you don't need to follow that thread to know where it ends. In all cases the language was the same, kept at home, not well, provided for, comfortable in their way. a private vocabulary of euphemism that made the situation manageable to discuss without making it necessary to describe. Mrs. Pell softens toward you, incrementally over the first month, not dramatically. This is not a woman who warms to anyone dramatically, but she begins to talk to you at the end of the day, in the kitchen over cups of weak tea, which is her way of relaxing. She relaxes while talking about work, specifically about the work of the house, and about the work as it used to be. Before Sir Edward died, she says, before the money began to run short, before Mr. Henry Whitmore took over the estate and found it, as she puts it, not what he had imagined it to be, which appears to mean that it had less money in it than he expected and more obligations than he wanted. Miss Anne costs, she says, with no particular emotion. The attendant, the doctor, the food, the heat. She needs proper heat in winter and good wood is expensive. Mr. Henry. She stops, chooses words. Mr. Henry is not a generous man. But he maintains it, you say. He maintains it, she agrees, because the alternative is a public madhouse, and a Whitmore in a public madhouse is, she makes a small, precise gesture with her hand, unacceptable, whatever else. That cannot happen. But if she's well enough to, you start. She is not well enough, Mrs. Pell says, firmly enough that you stop. She's been determined to require care. That determination has been made by her family and by Dr. Griggs and by the relevant parties. It is not for me or for you to revisit it. A long pause. I'm not saying you're wrong to think it, she adds quieter. I am saying it's not yours to think. She drinks her tea. The fire pops. The house settles in the cold. Somewhere upstairs, nothing. Silence. December arrives and brings with it a cold that is not merely cold, but a kind of presence in the house, a weight that occupies every corner and pushes in through every gap in the window frames. You can feel it through the walls when you put your hand on them in the morning. The stone is cold as a river stone, all the way through. You start carrying an extra blanket up to Miss Whitmore in the mornings, over and above what Mrs. Pell has instructed. She doesn't comment on it the first time. She takes it and wraps it around her shoulders with the unhurried care of someone who has learned not to show need too clearly, because showing need produces pity, and pity from a locked room is a terrible feeling to sit with. The second morning you bring it, she says, "Thank you, Thomas." First time she's used your name directly. You nod. You leave. You close and bolt the door and stand in the corridor for a moment with your hand against the wood and the key in your other hand and the cold of the stone under your feet coming up through your boots. You think, she did nothing wrong. You think, you don't actually know that. You think, you know it anyway. The private madhouse in Bath you hear about from Dr. Griggs, the 4th week, when he mentions it in passing during his visit as an example of what the alternative would look like if the family's finances fell much further. Blackstone's house, he says, Dr. Thomas Blackstone, takes 12 patients at a time, 40 shillings a week for a good room, 20 for the lower floor, 5 for what he calls the common ward, which I understand to be a large room with pallets and very little else. Is it a real hospital, you ask? It's a house, he says, a larger house than this, in better repair, with more rooms and a higher wall. Whether it's a hospital depends on what you mean by the word. There's a doctor, Blackstone himself, who visits when required. There are keepers, several of them, who maintain order. How do they maintain order? He's quiet for a moment. He's looking out the window of his own modest room. He has a room here when he visits overnight, the first of the proper bedrooms, which tells you something about the priorities of the household. Cold baths, he says, emetics, restraint when other methods fail. He pauses. Blackstone is not a cruel man, I think. I met him once. He believes he's doing good. He uses the standard treatments, bleeding, purging. The theory is that the madness is a physical imbalance, that if you bleed the excess humours out, the mind will right itself. Does it work? No, he says. In my experience, no. It sometimes produces a temporary sedation, which gets mistaken for improvement, and then the patient is precisely as they were before, only also debilitated. He turns from the window. Miss Whitmore has never been subjected to those treatments, I should tell you. I have consistently argued against them. The family has been willing to defer to my judgment on this point. Why? He picks up his bag. Because it costs money to have things done to someone, and it costs considerably less to leave them alone. My recommendations and Mr. Henry Whitmore's financial inclinations have happened in this regard to align. He says this with the thin, careful irony of a man who has made certain compromises with himself and has not quite finished deciding how he feels about them. You find the records in the 3rd week of December by accident. Mrs. Pell sends you to the study to find a document, some household account she needs, and while you're looking through the papers in the lower desk drawer, your hand lands on something that is not household accounts. A notebook. Old. The leather cover is soft with handling, the spine cracked. Inside, in small, tight handwriting, a list. Dates, names, notes. 1726. R.H. admitted. Agitation of spirits following bereavement. Chamber on East Wing. Managed with cold applications and prayer. Release 1729 to the care of husband. 1730. Dolbersay admitted. Persistent delusion of persecution. Violent at times. Required restraint on 3 occasions. Died in the room 1733. Fever 1732. A W admitted. Agitation of nerves and religious enthusiasm. Chamber on East Wing. Under management of Dr. G. Under management of Dr. G. Under management. You close the notebook. Replace it. Find the household accounts. Go back to Mrs. Pell. Your hands don't shake. You're proud of that. But you think about R.H. that night. Released to the care of a husband. After 3 years. What had she done? What had she said or refused to say? Believed or refused to believe? That put her in that room for 3 years. And she got out. And W.D. died there. And Anne is still there. Under management. 11 years. And counting. Christmas comes to Harrow Hall with the same muted functionality that governs everything else here. Cook makes a goose. Mrs. Pell allows a fire in the entrance hall. James brings greenery in from outside, holly, a little ivy, and hangs it with the earnest enthusiasm of someone determined to have Christmas be Christmas, regardless of what the house around him is doing. Mr. Henry Whitmore arrives on the 23rd. In a coach this time, the roads have hardened with frost, which makes them passable if not comfortable, and the cold has at least packed the mud solid. He's 40 years old. You've been told about him in the same fragmentary way you've been told about everything in this house. A detail here, a silence there. And when he arrives in the entrance hall and Mrs. Pell introduces you, you spend the first 30 seconds simply filing away the information of his face. Heavy, not fat, heavy. A broad face with small light-coloured eyes that move quickly, cataloguing. He dresses well, not lavishly, but well. He has the hands of a man who grew up in a house with servants and has never questioned it. "Hale," he says, "just your name. Looking at you the way you look at furniture, assessing load-bearing capacity, condition, whether it needs replacing. Sir, she been all right? He doesn't specify who. Yes, sir. No significant difficulties in the past month. Good, good. Already turning away. Griggs coming for Christmas. On the 25th, I understand, sir. Fine. And that's that. He goes to his study and you don't see him again until Christmas morning when he goes upstairs. You don't go up with him. Mrs. Pell tells you to give them the hour. Family time. You find yourself in the kitchen sitting with cook, who is basting the goose with an attention that borders on devotion, and you drink a cup of weak ale and listen to the house. You don't hear shouting, you don't hear weeping. After 40 minutes you hear something else. Singing. 2 voices. You can't hear the words. You can hear the rise and fall of the melody, faint through the floor and the stone above you. Something familiar. A carol. Something she would have known as a child in this house before any of this. And Henry Whitmore singing it with her, his voice lower than hers, both of them off key in the same direction. Cook continues basting without acknowledgement. You drink your ale. You think he loves her. In whatever broken, inadequate way has produced a situation, he loves her. And that's... You don't know if that makes it better or worse. Both. Probably both. That evening, after supper, Henry Whitmore comes to find you in the servants' corridor. He doesn't knock. He simply appears, which is the prerogative of the man whose name is on the house. She seems well, he says. Yes, sir. You've settled in. I believe so, sir. He's quiet for a moment. In the way of someone who has things to say and is measuring how many of them it's appropriate to say. You may wonder, he says finally, why things are as they are. You wait. She was not always like this, he says. When she was younger. Before, she was... He stops. Sharp. That's the word. She saw things clearly. Too clearly sometimes. She argued. She refused things. She said things in company that were... He stops again. Not suitable. What kind of things, you ask? He looks at you with those quick light eyes. The true kind, he says, and something in his expression that might be shame if it let itself develop passes through and is gone. She said the true kind of things, he nods, to himself, not to you. She's better where she is. She couldn't have... He stops for the last time and then just doesn't finish, and you realise he's not going to. And you realise also that the sentence has more than one possible ending, and none of them are good. Good night, Hale, he says. Good night, sir. He goes back to his room. You sit in the dark of the corridor for a long time. The new year comes in hard. The frost that hardened the roads before Christmas deepens in the first week of January, until the ground rings like iron when you walk on it, and the water in the washing basin in your room freezes overnight with a solidity that requires a genuine effort to break. You develop the habit of sleeping with your wool coat over the blanket and your boots near the bed, which helps with the cold and plays havoc with your back. But you're 19 years old, and your back doesn't know what trouble is yet. Miss Whitmore's window stays open for its 20 minutes regardless. This is the thing that bothers you more than almost anything else in the first months. More than the bolt, more than the chamber pot, more than the bars on the glass, the open window. In January, with the temperature outside low enough that your exhaled breath hangs in the air as a solid white cloud that takes seconds to disperse. You open that window and stand to one side and count the minutes on the house clock in the corridor. You can hear it faintly if the house is quiet enough, and the cold pours in off the fields and into the room like water over a step. Dr. Griggs prescribed it. Fresh air, he said. vital. The theory being that close confined air is pestilential, that it produces and sustains illness of both body and mind, and that regular ventilation, even brutal ventilation, is preferable to the alternative. And she doesn't complain. She wraps herself in every blanket she has and sits in the chair and watches the open window with the focused inward attention of someone trying to extract something from an experience that is mostly just unpleasant. It smells like snow, she says, on the 5th of January. You lean toward the window. The air that comes in is sharp and clean and carries something underneath it, something faintly metallic, something that does indeed smell like the promise of snow. I think you're right, you say. When I was a child, she says, I used to stand at the window in my bedroom and smell for snow. My bedroom faced north. Better for it. She adjusts her blanket. There's a particular point, about an hour before it actually begins, where the air changes. Everything gets very still. The birds stop, and there's that smell. You close the window. The cold stays in the room longer than you'd like. You had a north-facing bedroom, you say. The second room on the left at the top of the main stairs, she says. 4 windows, a writing desk under the far window. Blue curtains. Not a good blue. A rather aggressive blue that I was very fond of at 8 and less fond of by 16. But nobody changed them. She pauses. I believe it's the linen room now. Henry needed the space. The matter-of-factness of this sits in the room between you. Have you asked, you say, then stop, because you know the answer. To go back to it? She looks at you with those still dark eyes. I asked in the first year, several times. Then I understood the asking wasn't productive and I stopped. She opens her book. That's not defeat, Thomas. That's mathematics. When a thing cannot be changed, spending energy on it produces deficit. One learns to spend energy on things that can be changed. What can be changed, you ask? She looks at the book in her hands. What I read, what I think, how I talk to the people who come through that door. She glances up. Whether I make this tolerable or intolerable for myself, that's still mine. They haven't found a way to take that yet. Yet. The word sits there after she says it. She doesn't acknowledge it. You take the tray, close the door, draw the bolt. You stand in the corridor and your hand is on the bolt and it strikes you, not for the first time and not for the last. A wave of something physical. Something that starts in the chest and moves outward. The sheer wrongness of it. The bolt. The key. The window that opens for 20 minutes in January to let in the snow-smelling air and then closes again and locks. You stand there for a moment. Then you go downstairs and do the next thing, because that's what you're here to do. The snow comes that afternoon. It starts while you're at the kitchen table eating the midday meal, bread, cold meat, a small beer. And you hear it before you see it, which is to say you don't hear it, because snow arriving is one of the quietest things in the world, and the absence of the wind that's been scraping at the windows all morning is what tells you. James goes to the window first. There it is, he says, pleased, like snow is a friend he was expecting. You go to look. The yard is already white. The hedges that bound the kitchen garden are acquiring caps. The flat fields beyond the wall are disappearing under white, becoming something simpler and cleaner than fields usually are, and the sky is low and grey and producing more. She'll want to see it, you say, not thinking. James looks at you. You think about what you've just said, about who you meant. I'll take the afternoon tray up early, you say. You take the tray up an hour before the usual time. Mrs. Pell doesn't stop you. She's occupied with the linen cupboard, and her attention is, for once, not on the east wing. You unlock the door, knock, open it. "Early," Miss Whitmore says, looking up from her book. "Snow," you say. She's out of the chair before you finish the word. She crosses to the window in 3 strides, puts her hands on the bars, not gripping them, just touching, fingertips resting on the iron, and looks out. The field beyond the window is entirely white now. The snow is still falling, soft and unhurried, the particular kind of snowfall that intends to stay. The sky is the colour of pewter. A single crow is walking across the white field, its black feet leaving a dotted line behind it, its pace unhurried and faintly indignant. She watches it. You set the tray on the table, stand by the door, give her the window. For a long time she doesn't speak. "The last time it snowed like this," she says, finally. "Henry sent word that he couldn't come. The roads. I understood." But she stops. Her fingers move slightly on the bars. "But I had baked a cake. Mrs. Pell helped me. We had an hour in the kitchen that morning while the previous attendant as was ill. Mrs. Pell helped me bake a cake, and then Henry didn't come, and we ate the cake ourselves, Mrs. Pell and I, at this table." She turns from the window. There's colour in her face. "That was," she thinks, "4 winters ago. No, 5. She goes back to her chair, sits, doesn't pick up the book. "Does she remember?" you ask. "Mrs. Pell, the cake?" "I've never asked her," she says. "I've thought about asking her. I don't know why I haven't." You think about Mrs. Pell in the linen cupboard downstairs with her iron efficiency and her tea, and her carefully maintained separateness from sentiment. "I think she remembers," you say. Miss Whitmore looks at you. Something in her face shifts, very slightly, very briefly, and then settles back. "Eat your porridge," you say. "It's gone cold." She picks up the bowl, almost smiles. "It's always cold before it arrives. The distance from the kitchen. I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. It's not your fault the kitchen is where it is. It happens on a Wednesday in the last week of January. You know it's going to happen. Or rather, you know in retrospect that you knew. The way you sometimes know things have been building toward a point without being able to say how you knew. The week before it, she's quieter than usual, less inclined toward conversation. The books stay closed more often. She eats less, not dramatically, but measurably. The porridge left half finished, the bread untouched. You mention it to Mrs. Pell on the Monday. "Watch her," Mrs. Pell says, which is not helpful exactly, but is what she says, so you watch. Wednesday morning you take the tray up at the usual time. You knock. No answer. You knock again. Open the door. She's on the floor, not collapsed, not unconscious. Sitting on the floor by the bed, knees drawn up, her forehead resting on her knees, her arms wrapped around her legs, completely still. She's still in her nightdress. She hasn't gotten up this morning. "Miss Whitmore," you say. Nothing. "Anne," you say, carefully, because you've never used her first name directly before, and you're not sure you're allowed to, but she hasn't responded to the other thing, a very slight tightening of her arms around her legs. "I'm going to put the tray down," you say. "I'm going to get some more water. I'll come back." You put the tray down. You go back to the kitchen and get more water, and you tell Mrs. Pell in 2 sentences, not dramatic, just factual, and you go back upstairs. She's still on the floor. You pull the chair over, sit in it, near her, but not too near. The room is cold. The window's 20 minutes are done, but the cold has stayed, settling into the stone. I'm going to stay here for a while, you say. You don't have to say anything. Silence. The house clock in the corridor marks the quarter hour, then the half. The snow from last week is mostly gone now, just grey traces at the edges of the window bars, and the fields outside are brown and bare and flat under a sky the colour of a bruise. She doesn't move. You stay. After an hour, she says, without lifting her head, I'm sorry. Don't be, you say. I'm being... She pauses. I know this is difficult. I'm sitting in a chair, you say. It's not difficult. A pause. You could go, she says. I won't. It's all right. I won't do anything. You know what she means by anything. You've thought about it. You think about it more since the farmer in the tavern told you about the cousin in the cellar for 20 years, dying in his sleep at 63, and whether that was a life. I'm not going, you say. Another long silence. Tell me something, she says. Her voice is muffled by her knees. Tell me something from outside, something you saw. Anything, you think. There's a cart horse in the stable, you say. A grey one. I don't know his name. James calls him Old General, but I think that's James's name for him, rather than his actual name. Every morning when I go to the yard for water, he puts his head over the door and looks at me, not asking for anything, just watching. He has one ear that goes sideways. A very small sound, it might be the beginning of a laugh. One ear that goes sideways, she says. The left one, it just goes at about 45 degrees. The other one is normal. He looks permanently sceptical. A pause. What colour are his eyes? She asks. Brown, very dark brown, almost black. There's something in horse eyes. They're so large and there's so much. You search for the word consideration in them, like they know something. They probably do, she says. We've been working horses for 6,000 years. They've had time to observe us closely. She lifts her head just slightly, resting her chin on her knees now instead of hiding her face. Her eyes are red. She's been crying, though not now. What is today? Wednesday. The date. The 23rd. She nods. Something in the nod tells you the date means something. You don't ask what. 11 years and 4 months, she says very quietly. Yes. She doesn't say anything else, but she stays with her chin on her knees and her eyes on the middle distance, and after another half hour you see, without ceremony, without drama, her shoulders drop. One small release of held breath, like a knot loosening slightly. I'll eat the porridge, she says. It'll be terrible. It is terrible, you agree. I've had it. You eat the same porridge, same pot. For the first time in days, something in her face that is genuinely amused. That's a comfort, she says, shared suffering. You hand her the bowl. She eats it cold, sitting on the floor, and doesn't complain once. Dr. Griggs comes that afternoon. Not his scheduled day, but Mrs. Pell sent for him. You wait in the corridor while he's with her, and then he comes out and closes the door and looks at you. She spoke to you, he says. Eventually. That's good. The previous man, when she had episodes, he would stand in the doorway and not come in. He was frightened of her. She's not frightening, you say. He looks at you with an expression that is partly professional evaluation and partly something more personal. No, she isn't. He picks up his bag. This one will pass. They always do. 3, 4 days, and then she'll be... He pauses. Back to herself. The difficulty is that being herself and being in that room are eventually incompatible, and He stops himself. The difficulty is that this is a difficult situation, which I am telling you as if you don't already know. What caused it, you ask? This episode. He looks at the door. The 23rd of January, he says, every year, without fail. He doesn't elaborate. And from the set of his jaw you understand that he knows what happened on the 23rd, and that it's the thing nobody has told you and probably isn't going to. Keep an eye on her. Send James for me if it worsens. He goes. You stand in the cold corridor with the key in your hand and the bolt beside you, and the weight of the 23rd of January settling into you like water into stone. She's better by Friday. You know she's better because Friday morning you bring the tray and she's at her table with the Milton open, and she says without looking up, "Have you gotten to the part yet where Satan decides that it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven?" "I haven't started it," you say. "You should. And when you get to that part, think about the architecture of the argument. It's very seductive. It sounds like courage. It sounds like dignity. And it is, partly. But it's also," she looks up, "partly the logic of someone who has been told they have no other options." A pause. "I find that interesting." "I'll bear it in mind," you say. "Do." She picks up her spoon, looks at the porridge, puts it down again. "Thomas." "Yes. Thank you. For Wednesday." "I didn't do anything." "You stayed," she says. "That is the thing. You stayed and you talked about a horse, and that was..." She stops. "That was what was needed." You nod. You go. In the corridor you lean your back against the wall for a moment and breathe. The cold stone of the wall through your coat is oddly stabilizing. Real. Exact. Something to push back against. You stand there for a count of 10. Then you go downstairs. February brings mud. The snow is gone and the frost is going, and what's left is the wet, dark earth of the Wiltshire fields releasing everything they've been holding. And the lanes turn back to what they were before December solidified them. Soft, deep, treacherous in the dark, passable by cart only if you know exactly where you're going. Dr. Griggs suggests the trip to Bath in the second week of February, and you've been thinking about it since December, since he first mentioned Blackstone's house, and you say yes before he finishes the suggestion. "I want you to see it," he says. "Not because I'm recommending it, because I think you should understand what the alternative looks like. You get a day and a half." Mrs. Pell grudgingly agrees to cover the trays. She does it without warmth, but she does it because she's been covering them in gaps for 11 years, and she knows the routine better than she lets on. James, with elaborate casualness, asks if he can come along. He frames it as wanting to see Bath, which you both know is true and is also not the reason. Dr. Griggs takes you by gig, a small, fast, two-wheeled thing pulled by a compact bay horse that navigates the February mud with the impassive competence of a very experienced athlete. The roads are bad. The gig is not comfortable. You sit with your shoulder touching Dr. Griggs's and your boots 3 inches above the splashboard, and you watch Wiltshire turn slowly into Somerset and try not to think too hard about what you're going to see. Bath is a different world from Harrow Hall. This is not a figure of speech. It is genuinely, materially different in the way that a painting is different from the thing it's painted of. Same subject, different substance. The streets are paved, the buildings are new stone, pale and clean, the kind of purposeful new construction that says money arrived here recently and intends to stay. There are sedan chairs being carried by men in livery. There are women in clothes that cost more than your annual wage. There's a public pump room, tea rooms, an assembly room where they hold dances 3 times a week in season and once a week out of it. Bath, in 1743, is where England's comfortable classes come to be seen and to take the waters and to arrange the marriages and business dealings that require the neutral territory of a spa town. It is also, in several of its less conspicuous streets, a place where people go when their families have run out of other options. Blackstone's house is on a street that isn't in the fashionable part of the city, though it's close enough that you can hear, at certain times of day, the sound of music from the assembly room a quarter-mile away. The house itself is large. Larger than Harrow Hall, 4 stories, a walled garden behind. Clean, well-maintained. The brass on the door is polished. Dr. Thomas Blackstone receives you in his study. He is a man of about 50, heavy in the shoulders, with a face that is professionally composed into an expression of moderate benevolence. He wears a good wig and a good coat, and he shakes Dr. Griggs's hand with the ease of a man who shakes many hands. "A visit from the country," he says. "Come to see what we do here." He looks at you. "An attendant?" "A new one," Dr. Griggs says. "I thought it useful for him to see the broader landscape." "Very sensible." Blackstone settles back in his chair. "We take the finest care of our patients. 12 at present, though we have capacity for 15. Each patient has their own room, or shares with one other, in cases where the company is beneficial. We are firm believers in structure, regular meals, regular exercise in the garden when weather allows, regular consultation." "May I see the rooms?" Dr. Griggs asks. A very brief pause. So brief you might have missed it. "Of course," Blackstone says. "The upper floors smell the way Miss Whitmore's room smelled, magnified. Not filth. It's clean, genuinely clean, the floors swept and the windows letting in the thin February light. But that concentrated human smell, 11 or 12 people breathing in closed rooms, chamber pots and food and bodies. The first room has a man in it who is perhaps 60, sitting in a chair by the window in a heavy coat despite the relative warmth of the room. He doesn't look up when Blackstone opens the door. "Mr. T," Blackstone says cheerfully. "Visitors today?" The man doesn't respond. His eyes are open but very fixed, focused on something in the middle distance that isn't in the room. "Laudanum," Blackstone says, low as you back out of the room. He's better managed with it. He was quite agitated before. The second room is empty, its occupant being, Blackstone explains, in the garden for their morning exercise. The room is tidy, a bed, a chair, a table with nothing on it. The walls are bare plaster. It's the bareness that gets you. Not dirty, not cruel, just utterly empty. Nothing personal. Nothing to indicate that the person who sleeps here has any history outside these walls. The third room has a young woman in it. Young, maybe 20. She's at the table with a piece of needlework in her hands, and she looks up when the door opens with the same quick evaluating attention that Miss Whitmore uses, and it stops your breath for a moment. That identical expression. The expression of someone who has learned to read visitors fast. "Miss R," Blackstone says, "looking well." She looks at him, and then at you, and then at Dr. Griggs. She doesn't speak. She has periods of silence, Blackstone explains as he closes the door. The family found her distressing, very, he pauses, insistent, on certain subjects, wouldn't be guided. "What subjects, you ask?" He looks at you with polite surprise, as if the question is unexpected. "Her situation," he says. "Her family's treatment of her." A pause. "That sort of thing." You look at the closed door. Behind it, a young woman with her needlework and her quick eyes. insistent, wouldn't be guided. The common ward is on the ground floor. This is the 5 shillings a week room Griggs mentioned. Larger than the private rooms. Perhaps 20 feet by 15. 8 pallets, 3 patients present, all women, 2 of them elderly, 1 perhaps 35. This room is less clean. You notice it first in the smell, sharper, less managed, and then in the details. A pallet with a grey-brown stain on the ticking. A window that has a crack in one pane, stuffed with cloth. The women's clothes are clean but very worn. The kind of worn-through washing that happens when something has been laundered 50 times. One of the elderly women is talking to herself. Steadily, without urgency, a continuous low murmur. She doesn't acknowledge you. The other elderly woman is asleep. The 35-year-old sits with her back against the wall, her arms around her knees, and watches you with blank, cautious eyes. Something about the position, arms around knees, back against wall, catches at you. You saw that position 10 days ago, on the floor of the East Room at Harrow Hall. The patients in this ward, Dr. Griggs says very carefully, have they been here long? Mrs. A has been with us 7 years, Blackston says. Mrs. J, 4. Miss L arrived this autumn. He says it the way you'd say furniture has been in a room. 7 years. 4 years. It's just a measurement. In Blackston's study afterward, over tea that is better than anything you've drunk in 3 months, the 2 doctors talk. You sit to one side and drink the tea and say nothing, which is the correct thing to do, and you listen. They talk about treatments. Blackston advocates for a system he calls moral management, structure, routine, occupation. He's sceptical of excessive bleeding. He believes in cold baths for agitation. He shows Dr. Griggs a chair, a wooden chair mounted on a pivot, that can be spun rapidly to produce dizziness, which he explains has been found useful in interrupting periods of mania. The theory, he says, is that the rapid rotation disrupts the excessive nervous activity that produces the manic state. Does it work? Dr. Griggs asks, in exactly the same tone he uses when you ask him whether bleeding works. It produces a temporary, Blackston pauses, quiescence. Says Dr. Griggs. You look at the spinning chair. It's in the corner of the study, very matter-of-fact, as ordinary as the desk or the bookshelf. You think about being put in that chair, about being spun, about someone with Blackston's professionally benevolent expression, explaining that this is for your benefit. You drink your tea and say nothing. On the road back, in the February dusk, the gig jolting over the ruts with Dr. Griggs's horse, moving at the reliable trot of an animal who wants to be in his stable, you say, "How many are there? Houses like that?" In England, he thinks. Difficult to say. No comprehensive register yet. Perhaps 100 private madhouses of varying size and quality. More, probably, that operate quietly. A widow who keeps 2 or 3 patients in her large house. A doctor with a converted barn. All of them full, you say. All of them full, he agrees. The lights of the first village come into view ahead. Candles in windows, orange against the blue dusk. And the families, you say, they visit, he says. Some of them. Many of them visit in the beginning, and then he shifts the reins. The visits become less frequent. There's a process of, it's not forgetting, more like not looking directly at the thing, the way you learn not to look directly at a very bright light. That woman, you say, the young one, in the common ward, Miss L. She arrived this autumn. What does that mean? What happened to her? He's quiet for a moment. The horse's hooves on the road steady and rhythmic, the cold air smelling of mud and something faintly green beginning in the hedges at either side. Her family, he says. Husband, I believe. She was... He pauses. She was judged to be of unsound mind. The paperwork was signed. The fee was paid, that's what it means. The paperwork, you say? What paperwork? 2 physicians sign a certificate, stating that in their judgment the person is of unsound mind and requires care. This is... He stops. Since the Madhouses Act a few years ago, this is the law. Theoretically, it's a protection. 2 independent physicians. A check. Theoretically, you say. 2 physicians, he says, can be found who will sign what they're paid to sign. Not all physicians. Most physicians are honest. But the ones who aren't, they're not hard to locate if you know where to look. He says this without inflection, factually, like he's reciting a disappointing feature of the landscape. Miss Whitmore, you say, carefully. Her certificate. A long pause. I signed it, he says, 11 years ago, along with a Dr. Howard who has since died. The horse's hooves, the road, the darkening sky. Were you paid to sign it, you ask? You don't know if you're allowed to ask this. You ask anyway. I was paid for my professional services, he says, which is different. He pauses. I tell myself it's different. I've told myself this for 11 years. Another pause. I also believed at the time that I was acting in her best interest. She was genuinely ill at the time, genuinely in a state where the room was safer than the outside. I believed that. And now? He doesn't answer immediately. Now, he says, I believe that the room was appropriate for perhaps the first year, perhaps 2, and that what came after was... He stops. Inertia. The inertia of a situation that had been established, and that no one had either the authority or the inclination to challenge. The first lights of Harrow village ahead. 5 minutes to the house. You could, you say, couldn't you? Challenge it. I could, he says, and I have thought about it. And the consequence would be, at best, Blackstone's house. At best. At worst, somewhere with no pretence of care at all. He turns to look at you briefly in the last light. I am not defending what I have done. I am describing why I continue to do it. Those are different things, and I'd ask you to remember that. He looks back at the road. There is a man in York, he says, a Quaker, William Tuke. He's building something, a new kind of place. He calls it a retreat. For people of his faith initially, but the principles, he stops. Different. Treating the patients as not animals to be managed, but people to be understood. I have read about it. I correspond with someone who knows him. A pause. It's a small thing, a beginning of something. I don't know if it comes to anything in our lifetimes. But it's something, you say. It's something, he agrees. The gate of Harrow Hall comes into view. March arrives like a door opening. Not all at once. Nothing so dramatic. But the quality of the light changes in early March. The flat grey softening into something with more warmth in it. And then the elms to the left of the drive begin to show the first ghost of green at their tips. And then one morning you open the kitchen door and there's a smell that is so entirely the opposite of winter that you stand in the doorway for a full minute just breathing it. Earth. Living earth. Something growing in it. You describe this to Miss Whitmore on the morning tray because you found that the small reports from outside are one of the things that matter most in that room. Not the grand events. She gets those from the newspapers that Dr. Griggs brings and leaves for her. But the small things, the crow with the sideways walk, the horse with the lopsided ear, the smell of March. She listens with her whole attention. You've noticed this about her. She has the listening of someone for whom information about the outside world is not casual entertainment, but actual nutrition. She takes it in the way you'd take in food. The elms, she says. They're on the south side of the drive, the first ones to leaf out. The beeches come later. There are beeches at the back of the property, behind the kitchen garden. They don't fully leaf until April. How do you know? She looks at the window, the bars, the square of sky above the fields. I've been watching this window for 11 years, she says. I know when every tree in sight leafs out and when it drops. I know when the swifts come back in May and when they leave in August. I know which field gets planted with what, based on what I can see from here. Last year the south field was barley. This year I think it'll be left fallow. The colour of the turned earth is different. She pauses. You learn to read what's available. You have to. This is what the long captivity has made of her. Not broken, rearranged. A different kind of attention, precise and narrow and very deep, like a route that goes down instead of out, because that's the direction left available. The beaches, you say. I'll tell you when they start. I know when they start, she says, with something almost like warmth. I want to hear what you think they look like. Spring does something to the house that you couldn't have predicted from the winter. Mrs. Pell opens windows, not just in the east room, in the whole house, on the warmer afternoons, so that for the first time since you arrived there's a through flow of air, and the house stops smelling entirely like itself and starts smelling like what's outside, which is the lane and the fields and the turned earth, and very faintly, something floral from where the earliest thing in the kitchen garden is doing something worth noticing. Henry Whitmore doesn't come in March. He sends a letter, which Mrs. Pell reads and then places in the household file without comment. You don't ask what it says. James, with the seasonal shift that happens to young men in spring, becomes approximately twice as energetic and twice as likely to be found in the kitchen making conversation with Cook at inconvenient moments. Cook tolerates this with the patience of someone who has seen several James equivalents come and go, and Miss Whitmore begins, in the third week of March, to write. You bring the writing materials yourself, ink, a pen, paper, on her request, relayed through Mrs. Pell, who relays it with the neutral accuracy of a postal system. You're not sure what she's writing. You don't ask. It isn't your business. But you notice that she covers the pages quickly when you come in, and she turns them face down, and there's always a slight increase in colour in her face when you arrive on writing days, as if the act of it requires effort. You leave it alone. You bring the tray. You change the water. You open the window for 20 minutes. And one morning in the last week of March, she holds out a folded piece of paper and says, "This is for Dr. Griggs." You take it. "He'll know what to do with it," she says. She's looking at her book. Her voice is steady. "I'd be obliged if you didn't read it." "I won't," you say. "I know you won't." She turns a page. "I know." She says this the way she says many things, not as reassurance but as simple observation. She knows you because she has watched you every morning for 4 months, and she has the attention of someone who has nothing else to do with their intelligence. You take the letter, you carry it downstairs, you feel the weight of it. Just paper, just ink, and the feeling is something you can't entirely name. A trust placed somewhere. The specific trust of someone who has very little left to place it with. You give it to Dr. Griggs on his Thursday visit. He takes it. He reads it in the corridor while you wait. His expression changes, not dramatically. A slight tightening around the eyes. He folds it, places it in his coat pocket. "Thank you," he says. Not to you exactly, to the air. You don't ask what it says. But 3 weeks later, in April, Henry Whitmore arrives unexpectedly on a Tuesday, not his scheduled visit, and he and Dr. Griggs are in the study for 2 hours, and you hear, not words, just the rise and fall of serious conversation. And when Henry leaves, he passes you in the corridor and looks at you for a moment with those quick light eyes. "She seems stable," he says. "Griggs is suggesting a change to the arrangements. Something more? Considered?" He pauses. "I'm considering it." He goes. "You stand in the corridor. You don't know what's been proposed. You don't know if anything will come of it. You know that it's a small thing, probably, that even if Henry Whitmore agrees, whatever change comes will be incremental, tentative, hedged by all the same concerns that put her in that room in the first place. But you also know that she wrote it herself, that she chose the words, and she calculated what could be asked for, and she asked for it. And that is not nothing. That is someone making the one move available to them. What I read, what I think, that's still mine. You think, yes, and maybe a little more than that now. April. Dr. Griggs takes you out one afternoon, not for any particular purpose, just for what he calls an airing, which is his term for walking in the country, which he does regularly with the systematic dedication of a man who believes in it medicinally. He takes you up the lane north of the house, up the long slope of the chalk down that rises above the flat fields. The track is chalky and dry on top after a week of mild weather, white against the green, and it leads up through gorse that is beginning its mad yellow flowering, the kind of yellow that looks aggressive next to the pale sky. Your boots scrape on the chalk. The wind comes at you from the west, carrying cold, but also the smell of something larger, open land, open sky, the faint salt suggestion of the Bristol Channel 40 miles away. You come out on top of the down and stop, and from here you can see it. Not much of England, not all of Wiltshire even. But from here, 300 feet above the floor of the vale on the chalk ridge, you can see across the flat land below in 3 directions, and what you see is this: villages, church towers, the silver scratch of a river, fields that from up here resolve into a pattern, the strips and rectangles of agriculture, ancient and modern overlaid, the dark ploughed earth, and the pale emerging green of early crops and the dry brown of fallow. Stands of trees, a road running straight south, straight as a Roman road, because it is a Roman road, 2,000 years of feet, and wheels have worn it into the land so deeply it would take another 2,000 years to erase. And somewhere in the middle distance, almost directly south, the roof of Harrow Hall, a small grey rectangle among the fields, a door in the facade and 5 windows in the upper floor, and the east wing jutting back, and one of those upper windows catching the afternoon light. You stand there. "I bring all my new attendants up here," Dr. Griggs says from behind you. He's breathing slightly hard from the climb. "At some point in their first year." "Why?" He comes to stand beside you and looks out at the same view. "Because from down there," he says, "it's very easy to lose the proportion of things. The house becomes everything. The corridor, the room, the tray, the bolt. It becomes the whole world." He pauses. "But from up here," he gestures at the wide flat land below, the villages, the road, the river. "It's a house, one situation, in a country full of situations." You look at the grey rectangle of the roof. She's in there, you say. Yes. Right now, at this moment, she's in that room. Yes. You think about what the view looks like from the inside, the square of sky above the flat field, the trees she knows by heart, the progression of seasons across a window too high to see out of properly unless you stand. The letter, you say, to Griggs. What did it say? He's quiet. She asked to be allowed outside, he says, in the garden, not freely, accompanied, with someone, once a week, in daylight. He pauses. A very modest ask. What did Henry say? He said he would consider it. He's been considering it for 3 weeks. Yes. You look at the roof. The east wing window, the one catching the light. She can see more of the world from up here than she can from down there, you say, and she's never been up here. No, he says. Below you the road runs south. The fields spread out. The river catches the afternoon light. Somewhere in the elms birds are making the noise that birds make in April, insistent and jubilant and completely indifferent to anything that isn't spring. What does it take, you ask, to change a person's situation? Legally, what would it take? For her specifically? In general? He's quiet for a moment. Before 1774, essentially nothing. A family had nearly unlimited power to confine a relative in a private setting. After the Madhouses Act, theoretically a licence, an inspection, the two-physician certification. In practice, he stops. In practice, the systems are new and imperfectly enforced, and the culture, he chooses the word with care, the culture is not caught up with the theory. A woman whose family says she's unwell, backed by paperwork signed by a compliant physician, he doesn't finish. The same paperwork you signed, you say. The same, he says without defensiveness. Below, a cart is moving along the Roman road. A slow, dark shape, patient, working its way south through the April afternoon. The carter sitting up top, probably half asleep, probably perfectly warm in the spring sunshine, going wherever he's going. I'm going to write a letter, you say. Dr. Griggs looks at you. Not to Henry, you say. Not to anyone in that house. There are people. You mentioned a man in York. There are reformers. People who are asking questions. I have read. You've been reading. More? The past 2 months, getting papers when you can, following whatever threads you can follow. There are people who are asking these questions publicly, who are pushing for actual oversight, actual law. You're an attendant, Dr. Griggs says, not dismissively, descriptively. I'm someone who knows what's in that room, you say, and there are 100 houses in England with the same situation. 1,000. You said so yourself, and most of them. You stop. You think of the young woman in Blackstone's common ward, the woman with her arms around her knees, the steady, focused look. Most of them don't have anyone writing letters. A long silence, the wind from the west, the gorse, the cart moving south on the old road. You're 19 years old, Dr. Griggs says. Yes, you say. Write your letter, he says. I'll give you addresses. The beeches come into leaf in the second week of April, just as she said they would. You report this on the morning of the 12th. She listens with her eyes closed. Describe them, she says. The new leaves are very small, very green. Not dark green. The green before dark green, if that makes sense. Almost yellow green. The light comes through them differently than through the old leaves will be. You can see the sky through them, but softened, filtered. There's a quality of light under beeches in the early April that I don't have a word for. Luminous, she says, without opening her eyes. The word is luminous. Luminous, you agree. May comes. The Swifts come back. She tells you the date, the 9th, and you watch for them from the kitchen garden. And they arrive on the 10th, screaming through the evening sky in long arcs, which you report with a slight defensiveness, as if the one-day delay is your fault somehow. And she says, last year it was the 8th, the year before the 11th. It averages out, and there is in her voice something that is not quite peace and not quite resignation, but is in the territory of both, the acceptance of cycles, of the things that come back. In June, something happens that is not dramatic and is completely significant. Mrs. Pell unlocks the East Wing room on a Tuesday afternoon, and Miss Whitmore walks down the corridor and down the stairs and through the kitchen. Cook looks up, looks back down, says nothing, though her hands stop moving briefly and then start again, and out into the kitchen garden. You're with her. Of course you're with her. That's the condition. Attended, accompanied. She walks slowly, not because she's weak. You'd thought she might be weak after 11 years, but she isn't. Not especially. The room isn't that small and she paces it, but because she's paying attention to everything. Her feet on the stone path, the smell of the garden in June, herb beds, warm earth, something sharp and green from the cutting garden beyond the wall. The sky, which is cloudless and blue and vast in a way that a window bar can reduce but not replicate. She stops at the centre of the path and puts her face up. Sun. Full sun. Direct. On her face. You stand back a few steps and look at the garden and give her the moment without witnesses. It's 5 minutes. Then she turns. There's a herb bed, she says. Mrs. Pell must have put it in. I can smell mint and... She leans forward, careful, identifying. Lemon balm. And thyme. It's been there 2 years, you say. I think James planted it. James? She sounds something grateful about this. He's a good boy. He's terrible at cards, you say. She almost laughs. Actually, almost laughs. The sound starts, and then she schools it back. The habit of many years, and you note this and also note that the habit almost failed to hold. I'd forgotten, she says quietly, looking at the herb bed, what it smells like, properly smells like. I can smell it through the window if the wind is right. But this... She leans forward again, picks one leaf of mint, rubs it between her fingers, holds it to her face. It smells like itself, she says. You stand in the June garden, and the sky is blue, and the mint in her fingers smells like itself. And you think about the woman in Blackstone's common ward, and the marks on the wall by her bed, and the letter you sent 6 weeks ago that has not yet received an answer. And you think small things. First the garden, then what comes after the garden, and after that. You don't know what comes after that, but small things, in order, one at a time. There is a question you've been not asking for 6 months, and one July evening you finally ask it. Dr. Griggs is staying overnight, a late visit that ran into evening, a difficult conversation with Henry Whitmore via letter that required a response, the kind of domestic complexity that the house generates without effort. He's in the kitchen with you after supper, the household settled, the July evening still light outside the kitchen window in the way of long days, the sky going from blue to gold to something softer. The 23rd of January, you say. He looks up from his tea. You don't have to tell me, you say. I'm asking. A long pause. There was a man, he says. Someone she was connected to. Before the engagement that fell through. Before. A man she loved, I think, in the way young people love. completely, and with very poor judgment about what it's likely to come to. He wraps his hands around his cup. He died. Fever. Very sudden. The autumn of 1731. The 23rd of January, you say? Was his birthday, Griggs says. He was her age. He'd have been 34 now. He pauses. The grief. It was extreme, extended. The family. Found it inconvenient, you say. Found it alarming, he says, and you hear in his voice the effort of someone trying to believe the more charitable version. And then the visions began, the religious escalation, and the things she said about her situation, about the family, about... He stops. She was, as I told her brother much later, probably not mad at all, probably just devastated and angry and saying true things loudly. The kitchen is very quiet. The light outside the window has gone to gold. And you put her in the room, you say. I signed the paper, he says. Yes. Knowing. Suspecting, he says. There's a difference. Is there? He doesn't answer this. I can't undo it, he says finally. I've thought about it a great deal. I cannot undo the 11 years. I'm trying to. He stops. The garden is a beginning. If Henry will agree to further steps. If the situation can be reconstituted gradually. If, you say. Yes, he says. If. He looks at his tea. The world moves slowly, Thomas. Slower than it should. Slower than it must for the people who are waiting. You think about marks on a wall. 170. 200. She knows you signed it, you say. Yes. Does she? She has never said a word about it to me, he says. Not in 11 years. She is... He stops. She is a better person than I am. That is what I know, and I try to live with that. The gold outside fades. July evening turning to dusk. Somewhere in the kitchen garden, something that is probably a blackbird is doing the thing blackbirds do at dusk in July. The cascading liquid call that spills from high notes down and down, unhurried, as if time isn't a concern. You both listen to it. Neither of you says anything. The year turns again. September and the harvest. The south field that she called as fallow is indeed fallow, and the barley is in the north field, and on the harvest days you can hear from the east window the distant sound of scythes and voices. She listens to it with her eyes closed. Tell me, she says, 6 men in the north field, working from the east and west. The grain is pale, very dry. It's been dry all August. Dust when they swing the scythes. The light is late summer light, you know the quality of it. Low and very yellow. Everything casts a long shadow at this hour. Afternoon. Mid-afternoon. The men take a rest at the field edge every hour or so. One of them has brought a dog which is doing nothing useful and is very pleased with itself. She opens her eyes. Something in her face that I can only describe as hunger. Not physical, the other kind. The hunger of 11 years of a window. I used to go to the harvest, she says. When I was a girl, my father took us, Charlotte and me. He'd lift us up to see over the grain before the cutting. Very golden from that height, very loud with insects, she pauses. I can't remember the last harvest I actually saw. Not through a window, actually in. The garden, you say carefully. The garden is something, a pause. It's not the harvest. No, it isn't. Dr. Griggs is pushing Henry again, you say. You choose words. About an expansion of the current, arrangement. She looks at you. You know, she says, not a question. Some of it. How much of it? The letter, you say. The garden. The ongoing conversation. She's quiet. He means well, she says finally. Samuel. He's not a bad man. He's a man who made a bad decision and has been compensating for it ever since, which is very human and also not quite the same as undoing it. No, you agree. But, she looks at the window, the field where the harvest sound is continuing. But it is something, isn't it? Even imperfect things, even delayed things. You think about Tuke in York, building something new on a quiet piece of land. You think about the letter you sent that got a reply last month, cautious and bureaucratic, but a reply. You think about Blackstone's spinning chair in the corner of his study, matter of fact as furniture. Yes, you say, it's something. October. The Swifts left on the 18th of August as promised. She tracked their departure across 3 evenings, telling you each evening that fewer were visible, until the morning of the 19th when she said, "They've gone," with a certainty that came from knowing the sky outside that window better than anyone else alive. October and the trees begin to turn. The beeches she told you about first, the new pale green leaves that came in April, have darkened through the summer and now are going to gold, the exact reversing of the spring, and the light through them is different again from either the spring luminous or the summer dark green. Amber, she says when you describe it. The light through beeches in October is amber, like, she pauses, searches, like looking through a bottle, a brown glass bottle. Yes, you say, exactly that. The kitchen garden smells of dying year. The herbs cut back, the beds turned over, the last of the cutting garden gone to seed. November coming, winter ahead. But the garden visit has become a fixed thing now, not weekly. Henry didn't agree to weekly, but fortnightly. An hour on Thursday afternoons when the weather allows. You accompany her, and Mrs. Pell sometimes comes to the kitchen door and watches, at a distance that is technically inside the house. On the 3rd October visit, it rains. Not hard. A fine, persistent drizzle, the kind that soaks you slowly without drama. You start to turn back. She doesn't. It's rain, she says. She holds out her hand. The drops catch on it, small and clear, and she looks at them the way you'd look at something precious. The last time I was in rain, she says, outside, actually in it. She pauses, calculating. I was 22, the summer before. We were caught in a storm coming back from the village, Charlotte and I. We ran the last quarter mile back to the house, completely soaked, laughing. She looks up at the grey sky, the drizzle on her face. Charlotte lives in Dorset now. We write twice a year. You stand in the October rain in the kitchen garden and let her have it. She doesn't stay long. 10 minutes, maybe. She's sensible about it. She doesn't want to take cold, doesn't want to give anyone grounds for restricting the visits. She turns and goes inside with the efficient practicality of someone managing a situation carefully. At the door she stops, turns back. Her hair is wet. Her grey dress has dark patches at the shoulders. Thomas, she says. Yes. Whatever comes of the conversation Dr. Griggs is having with Henry, whatever it comes to. A pause. I know you've written to people. I know because Samuel told me. Not the contents, just that you'd done it. She looks at you steadily. I want you to know that's... She stops. That matters to me. You nod. Even if nothing comes of it immediately, she says. Something will come of it, you say. You don't know this, but you say it. She nods, goes in. The October rain continues on the empty garden. November again. Full circle. 1 year. You lie in your room in the servants' wing of Harrow Hall, Wiltshire, on your rope spring mattress with the straw ticking and the thin blanket and your coat on top because it's cold again. It's always cold again. And you listen to the house. The house has a voice you know now. You know the creak of the third stair, the way the wind hits the north-facing windows differently from the east-facing ones, the sound the kitchen door makes when cook comes in before dawn. Not the door itself, but the change in the quality of the air, the faint ghost of her presence. You know the sound of Miss Whitmore walking her room at night. Not every night. Most nights, silence. But sometimes, at 2 or 3 in the morning, a soft, regular sound from above. 4 steps east, pause, 4 steps west, 4 steps east, back and forth in the dark, measuring the same space she always measures, keeping herself moving, keeping herself here. You lie still and listen to it. 1 year of mornings, 1 year of trays and water and 20 minutes of open window, and the bolt sliding into its housing, and the key turning in the lock. 1 year of watching a person exist in 8 feet by 10, making what she can of the window and the books and the occasional hour in a kitchen garden. You think about the marks on the wall by her bed. You went back and counted one afternoon in April when she was in the garden. 194 marks. This year you've watched her add 12 more. 1 each morning, a small mark, charcoal or chalk or the edge of a nail, made with the unhurried precision of someone who has long since given up emotional content in the act, and just marks the day, marks that it was, that she was. You think about what Dr. Griggs said on the hill. The world moves slowly, slower than it should. You think about William Tuke in York and his retreat and the letter you sent and the cautious reply. About the reformers pushing for actual inspection of private madhouses. About the small, grinding, impersonal machinery of change that moves on timescales that are very poor comfort to the person counting mornings on a wall. But moving. Outside, the wind picks up. November wind, the first real winter wind of the year, coming off the plain from the west with the particular commitment of English winter weather that has been travelling a long distance and isn't done yet. It finds the gap in your window frame. You've stuffed it with cloth, the same technique as Blackstone's common ward. But there's always a gap left, always a small thread of cold air. You pull the coat tighter. Above you, nothing. Silence. She's asleep. You hope she's asleep. You think about what changes in a year. In you. Things you know now that you didn't know. The weight of the key in your hand, which was foreign once and now is simply the weight of the key. The way you move through the house, confident in the dark, certain of the third stair. The faces that are familiar now. Mrs. Pell's controlled severity. Cook's studied indifference that you've come to understand as not indifference but management. James's cheerful obliviousness. That is and isn't as complete as it seems. And Anne, Miss Whitmore, the dark eyes and the quick total attention, and the 194 marks on the wall, and the way she held a mint leaf in June like it was something holy. You think, I know one person here, one real person, in the specific way that means knowing, the texture of her, the shape of her mind, the thing she's lost and the thing she hasn't let be taken. And tomorrow you'll take the morning tray and draw the bolt and knock on the door, and she'll look up from the Milton or the geography or the Bible with the margins full of her small handwriting, and you'll set down the porridge and it'll be cold, and she'll eat it cold without complaint, and that will be one more day. And on the Thursday she'll go to the garden, and the beeches will lose the rest of their leaves, and the swifts will come back in May, and somewhere in York a Quaker is building something, and somewhere in London a parliamentary committee is hearing evidence, and somewhere, in more houses than you can count, in rooms with bolts on the outside, in private madhouses with spinning chairs in the corner, in workhouses and barns and cellars, people are counting mornings, making marks on walls, waiting. The wind settles, not gone, but lower, finding its rhythm, no longer pushing against the house but moving with it, around it, accepting it as an obstacle and flowing on. The house breathes. The third stair doesn't creak tonight. Nobody's on it. Your eyes are heavy. The day, which was long in the way, all days here are long, not dramatically but steadily, hour by hour, the small work of care that never completely ends. The day is finished. It has been accounted for. It was lived in. That counts for something. You don't know what the year ahead holds. You don't know what Henry will decide in the end about the question Dr. Griggs has been putting to him patiently for months. You don't know whether the letters will become anything, whether the reformers will succeed, whether the world will move fast enough to matter to the people in it right now. You know that it will move. You know because it has moved. Because in 1796, which is not yet, which is across the horizon of years, William Tuke will open his retreat, and it will change what people believe is possible. Because in 1808 the County Asylums Act will pass. Because the commission that will inspect the private madhouses and find horrors will be formed, slowly, by people who were once, somewhere, attending to someone in a locked room and decided that wasn't sufficient. These are not facts you have. You're 19 years old in 1743 and you have a key and a letter that got a reply and one person you know in the specific way. But you have this, the conviction, which settles into you in the dark of the November room, that the account is not closed, that the world is moving towards something, that the marks on the wall are counted by something, even if that something is just the future itself. The church bell from the village, 1 in the morning, carried on the tail of the wind, thin and clear, 4 hours until cook, 5 until the dawn. Let the rest of it go. Let the key on the hook be the key on the hook, heavy and iron and real and tomorrow's problem. Let the house settle around you. The stone walls, the cold corridors, the stair with the soft third step. Let the wind do what wind does. Move across the plain, find the gaps, keep going. You are warm enough. Here in this room, under this coat, with the straw ticking, poking through at approximately the same 7 points as always. You're warm enough. You're tired in the particular way that comes from a year of days that mattered, that are something of you, that didn't pass like water but sat with you and changed you and left you slightly different at the end of them than you were at the beginning. That's not nothing. That's almost everything. You close your eyes. The sounds of the house, the wind. Somewhere above you, in the dark, a woman is sleeping. A woman who can identify a harvest from the sound of scythes and knows what amber light means, and held a mint leaf in June like something sacred. A woman who counts mornings on a wall and reads Milton and teaches herself the astronomy of beeches, and asked very precisely for what she needed and waited. She's still here. You are still here. Tomorrow the tray will be cold. The window will open for 20 minutes in the cold. The bolt will slide. The key will turn. But also, the beeches will lose their last leaves this week, which means the view from the east window will be wider now, the field visible further back. She'll notice. She notices everything. The world is very old and very patient. The houses like this one have been full for longer than any one person's life. The rooms with the bolts, the families with their necessary silences, the language of provided for and not well and comfortable in their way, all of it older than 1743, older than England's particular arrangement with itself, as old as the idea that something inconvenient can be put somewhere and locked and talked about in the past tense, while it breathes in the present. And also, as old as the impulse to say no, that's not right, to write letters, to build retreats, to count the marks on the wall and refuse to pretend they aren't there. Both things are old. Both things are in the world tonight, in the November dark, in the house breathing around you, in the key on its hook and the letter waiting for a reply and the Thursday visits to the garden and the mint crushed between her fingers in June. Both things. Let both things be true. Let the weight of the year settle. Let the third stair be quiet. Let sleep come up like water, slow and sure, and cover the day over. You've been in this house for 12 months. You've been young for all of them. You won't be young forever. But tonight you are. And the house is quiet, and the wind has found its rhythm, and somewhere in the dark the east window holds the November sky, and the bars on it are iron and old and very real. And also, on Thursday she'll go to the garden. It's enough. It will have to be enough. It is. Sleep. The night is long and the morning will come. It always comes. The church bell, and the cold and the third stair and the tray. And tomorrow you'll do it again, and the day after and the week after. But not now. Now. Rest. Let it all be quiet. Let the house sleep. Let the plane breathe in the dark. Let the year's work be what it was. You've earned this. Take it. Good night.